So this is a big white wall in my home office. I had previously done an accent wall on the opposing wall, and I did a video on that. I'll put a link in the description. But I wanted to do something on this wall to sort of balance out the room and tie it all together. This picture that I found just surfing the internet is my inspiration for this wall. I thought it was really unique how they made shelves out of piping and how the shelves are different levels and crawl from one wall to the other. I want to do two sets of pipe shelves, one on the left side of the wall and one on the right. And my first step was just to sketch out, very rough drawing, what those shelves might look like on both halves of the wall. The pipes and the shelves are going to have some weight to them, so as a next step I'm finding the studs in the wall. I'm going to want to anchor as many pieces of the structure to studs as possible. I'm using a magnetic stud finder here. I've never had much luck with the electronic ones. This one is picking up the drywall screws that are holding the drywall to the studs. Then I took some colored tape and started marking out on the walls where the pipes and the shelves would go, using different colors for the shelves and for the pipes. So here I'm generally matching the rough sketch that I made, but also trying to align the anchor points with where the studs would be. The green tape is just marking the boundaries of a piece of furniture that I intend to put in the middle of the wall. Figuring out what parts you need is one of the trickier parts of this project. So to start, I just ordered some parts, some T's, elbows, flanges, which are the round parts that secure to the wall, and some short lengths of pipe. One decision you have to make is the size of piping that you want to use. Common sizes are 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 inch. I wanted the shelves to have a more substantial look about them, so I'm using the 1 inch piping. Having some pieces to work with lets you screw them together and take some measurements. In particular, you'll need to know how far the pipe is going to come out of the wall before it makes a turn, and that's going to dictate your shelf depth. So now that I have more information about how these pipes fit together, I went ahead and wrote onto the tape the size pipe that I think I will need to get these shelves to line up with the studs that I had marked. And with that information, I then transferred all those measurements to a more detailed drawing. I want to paint this wall a dark color before I start putting up the pipe shelves, so I grabbed some samples and just did some comparisons with the pipe and the fittings. You'll notice that the pipes are black and the fittings are more of a gray color. I like that contrast, so I didn't change it. If you wanted a more uniform look, you could just spray paint everything. I decided on this graphic charcoal paint color. It's a Bear color from Home Depot. My walls are textured, and I find that painter's tape works not at all on textured walls. I've tried frog tape, I've tried the blue tape, and I can never get a clean line. So instead I've used this edging tool, which I've had a lot of luck with. Here's my full order of parts for this project. So we've got the couplers to join pipes together, the round flanges that are going to mount to the wall, shorter 2.5-inch pipes that are going to go through the shelves, T's, elbows, and then 4 different lengths of pipe, 4-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch, and 12 inches. And then caps that are going to go on the tops of the shelves. Not all these parts are going to be used, but I was curious as to what kind of weight I was going to be adding to the walls. All told, it's about 40 pounds of piping and fittings, and then you'd have to add to that the weight of the shelves on whatever you're going to put in the shelves. That's all within limits I'm comfortable the studs can support. So we have our studs marked and we have our detailed diagram, but we're not exactly sure that when we assemble it, it's going to line up with the studs, because the pipes, it depends how much you screw them into the fittings. It depends if you're using couplers or T's that are going to add width or length to the pipes. So what we decided to do is just assemble the whole shelf structure on the ground and then hold it up to the wall. Once we had it up on the wall, steadied and in place, we just used tape to mark where the flanges were hitting. And then I went back with the stud finder to compare the tape to where the studs actually were. In some cases they were lined up, in other cases they were not. And where they weren't, I just had to go back and tweak the drawing, add a little bit more pipe here or there to make the flanges line up with the studs. Finally, time to start assembling. So the flanges have 3 holes. If you rotate them properly, you can get 2 holes aligned with a given stud, which is what I try to do. And then the structure is that a 4-inch pipe is screwing into the flange and an elbow is screwing into the end of that. If you've designed it such that your shelf is going to sit on top of the pipes, then you can do the shelving later. In my case, I have some instances where the piping is passing through the shelf. And in that case, the shelving is going to have to go up as part of the piping structure. So here, the lowest shelf, the one on the dark wall, is going to sit on top. So I can come back and do that one later. The shelf that's going to be on the white wall is a pass-through. I can't emphasize enough the need to level and re-level and recheck. I highly recommend getting magnetic levels that you can just stick onto these pipes. It's a 3-dimensional structure, so you're leveling in 3 directions. It's a lot of checking to do before you start screwing things into the wall. For the shelves, I'm just using pine 2x lumber. I picked a depth of 9¼ inches, which corresponds to the depth of a 2x10. I had some boards laying around that were wider than that, in which case I just ran them through the table saw. To make the shelves blend with the accent wall I've already done in this room, I'm using the same wood slats left over from that project, and I'm just cladding the pine shelf in that wood. So these 2.5-inch pipes are just the right length to fit through a 2x lumber. And to know what size hole we need to drill, we got to measure the diameter of that guy. It's a little over 1¼ inches. And so ideally we would use a 1 3/8 bit, which I didn't own, so I used a 1½ inch bit to drill the holes. On this first shelf, my placement of the holes was not great, but I did figure out after this one a good way to accurately place the holes, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I didn't clad all sides of the shelf because depending on its height, not all sides are going to be seen. It was either going to be the top or the bottom. So depending on the height of the shelf, I just clad one side of it and then I painted the other side the wall color. On top of those two T's are two 2½ inch pipes that are going to go through the shelf. One side gets capped off, and because this is a through shelf, the other side uses a coupler to attach to another pipe. This whole set of shelves on the left anchors to the wall in 4 points. 3 of those anchors are hitting studs, but the other one, the one I'm working on now, is just drywall. So I'm drilling for drywall anchors. This is another through shelf, so again, it's got to go up as part of the pipe structure. I ran out of wood deep enough to make shelves, but I did have some extra 2x6s laying around, so I decided just to join those and then cut them down to the 9¼ inch width. A quick and dirty way to join wood is if you have a dowel, you can just drill holes in both ends of the wood and then put in some wood glue and squeeze them together with clamps. It's a little bit tricky to get the wood to line up. You want to move the drill around a bit, give yourself some play, and also leave room in those holes for the glue. This is the next day after the glue is dried, and they turned out pretty well. Alright, so here is the as promised method for getting the hole spacing right. What you want to do is you want to screw in the 2½ inch connector pipes and then measure outside to outside. Take into account the fact that the threads are tapered, so you need to measure middle to middle. In this case, it was a 17½ inch width. Decide how close you want your shelves to be to the wall. For my 9¼ inch shelves, the spacing worked out well if I drew a line that was 4 3/4 inches from the back of the shelf. then transfer your pipe measurement, your 17.5 inches, onto that line. And when you go to drill, you line up the outer edge of your bit with that marking. The key to getting the shelves to line up well is to make sure the joints are tight, and sometimes you need a little extra leverage on the pipe, in which case you can just screw in a temporary pipe and put some elbow grease into it. So you can see those 3 holes I drilled in the wall earlier. After I got that shelf up, I didn't like how it looked. It seemed like it was too high and too close to the white wall. So I ended up taking that down, reworking the design a little bit to make less distance between the shelves and to bump it out to the right a little bit. Level, 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 level in all 3 dimensions. A mistake I made was sometimes I would just check 2 and forget to check the 3rd, and I would have to take stuff down and redo it. So use magnetic levels and check level in all 3 directions. Left side is mostly done, so moving on to the right side of the wall. Same procedure as before, doing an assembly of just the pipe portion so that we can hold it up against the wall and make sure that the flanges are going to hit studs. On this side we did about as well as on the other side. Some of the flanges were going to hit studs and some were off by an inch or 2, so that required rejiggering some of the design. As I mentioned, the whole structure goes up better when the joints are tight, and one problem I had on the left side was that I was using a 1.5 inch bit, which was leaving too much play with the pipe that goes through the shelves. So I went ahead and bought a 1 3/8 inch bit, and that creates a much tighter fit through the shelves. This is probably a good time to talk about the pipe itself. So I bought all these pieces on Amazon, and there are a lot of vendors that sell iron pipe and fittings. I could not find a single vendor that had all the parts that I needed. And so I will leave a link in the description to the particular parts that I used. Some of the problems I ran into are that you need different length pipes to make different length runs on your pipe shelves. And not all vendors have a sufficient variety of pipe lengths. I also ran into vendors who were advertising their pipe widths strangely. Instead of advertising the inside diameter, they were advertising the outside diameter. There's also an issue about whether you want the threads showing after you screw them into the fittings. Some pipes, the majority of pipes, seem to come with tapered threads. And tapered threads, even when they're completely tightened into the fitting, you can still see a significant part of the thread outside the fitting. I didn't like that look, and so I found pipes which had non-tapered threads and a shorter set of threads such that you could fully tighten them and then you wouldn't see the threads sticking out of the fitting. So in the end, I think I pieced together a good set of reputable vendors which had pieces that worked well together and certainly came together well for my project. Again, I'll leave a link to all of that in the description. This last shelf was giving me some fits. It would show level in a couple directions. I just couldn't get it level in the last direction. I finally figured out that two of the pipes that I had joined with a coupler had misthreaded, and so they were, instead of being straight, at an angle with respect to each other. So once I figured that out, unscrewed them, rescrewed them, it went out much cleaner. Here are the pieces I had left over, various fittings and some lengths of pipe, some of which I had screwed so tightly onto connectors I couldn't get them off.